I was so focused on making sure everything was all right for him that I didn't go to pieces till later in the day. And I said to her, would you mind mixing it up? I can't mix up the drink that's going to kill him. I can hand it to him, but that's it.
Life and death, today and tomorrow. We're not afraid to talk about the complexity around saying farewell. From the experts at Celebrating Life. Welcome, I'm Kate Morgan, co-founder and head of memorials at Tomorrow Funerals. The first time I met Susan and her husband Ray was when I was invited to their home to discuss funeral arrangements in advance of Ray's death. Ray had been diagnosed with Motor Neurone Disease and was interested to hear about Tomorrow Funerals and how we could help him. A few days later, I was sitting in the front room of their home, answering their questions and listening to their story. I didn't know at that point that Ray had decided to utilise the Voluntary Assisted Dying Act of 2017 here in Victoria. What really struck me that day in that room was the connection between Sue and Ray, their story. Ray had his back to the bay window and Sue sat to his left. The light was streaming in, it was mid-morning, and each time I asked either of them a question, they would reply thoughtfully, but would lock eyes with one another as if I was not even in the room. The love between them felt palpable. When I asked Ray why he wanted to plan his own funeral, he explained that it was simple. He felt Sue had already gone through enough, and he wanted to make things as easy as possible for her. All of his planning was, in my eyes, an act of love. Sue, thank you for talking to us today.
You are most welcome.
We much appreciate it. Look, I understand that Ray was eligible for voluntary assisted dying after being diagnosed with MND. How did he first bring up the idea that this was something he wanted to do, and what were those conversations like?
Well, we had befriended a couple who were retiring from WA to Victoria. And not long after they arrived in Melbourne and we were getting to know them, Kim was diagnosed with MND. So we watched the entire process from having trouble walking with his foot dropping all the way through to his eventual death. And Ray saw the peg, the feeding tube being inserted. He saw the ventilation. He saw the inability to eat or participate in conversation all the way through to the bitter end. And he said to me, if that ever happened to me, just shoot me. And as soon as we got the diagnosis, we both knew exactly what was ahead of him. And he said, I want to apply for VAD. He said, I'm so grateful it's available. I want to die at home. And I said, I would do everything in my power to make sure he could die at home. And although I found the whole process of the idea of VAD rather overwhelming, I really wanted to support him because we both knew it was going to be a really rough journey. And he made it from diagnosis to death in 2 years, which is probably average. There aren't many Neil Danahers with MND. So we started the VAD process almost as soon as he got the diagnosis.
Wow. What was that like in the conversations between you? Was there a lot of emotion, or was it quite matter of fact? Or did it feel like a long way off initially? Or
Well, it did feel like a long way off initially. We knew that roughly most people, everyone's different with MND, but most people are about 2.5 years from diagnosis. So it felt as though we'd got a long time. And Ray did say from the outset, I might not take it. I might not use VAD, but it's going to give me peace of mind to know it's there if things become truly unbearable. So at the outset, we were quite matter of fact about it. And you have to be meticulous in your preparation for VAD. And the people who deal with you are all wonderful. And at every stage, ask questions to ensure that he was making the decision himself, that he knew what it entailed, that nobody was putting pressure on him. and to make sure that he knew he could pull out at any stage, even up to the point when the medication had been prepared and he was about to take it, he could change his mind. So they were very consistent and very supportive, and their calm, measured, matter-of-fact approach was very reassuring, because it is a hugely emotional experience for the carers and the patient, if you call him that. So the fact that the people who are the technicians, so to speak, are so thorough and so calm and measured is very reassuring.
What were some of those conversations like at home? And, did you talk about it all the time? I mean, I can imagine it would have been very prevalent in the house.
It was prevalent, but we tended not to talk about it once the medication, the little kit, had been delivered.
How soon in was that?
That was within about 5 or 6 weeks after you've gone through the process, because with the AD, your doctor's not allowed to bring it up with you.
Right.
You have to bring it up with your doctor, and that will start the process going. And we asked Ray's GP, we would like to know about voluntary assisted dying. And her response was, I'm not a vet. You'll have to go somewhere else for that. So
wow.
We mentioned this to the wonderful people from MND Victoria who were looking after us too. And we said, we want VAD and we don't know where to go for it. And they gave us the web link and the phone and all the details we'd need to contact VAD navigators. And it's the statewide care, it's something like that,
right?
Organised by the government, and they got the ball rolling.
I mean, that sounds like a ridiculous comment from the GP. How did that make you feel?
It was such a punch in the guts to both of us. We were speechless at the time and didn't think of a suitable riposte. We just left and said, what was that about? And Ray was much more forgiving than me. He said, look, doctors, they strive to keep people alive. You can understand why some of them don't want to be involved with VAD. It was really not her sentiment, I don't want to be involved. It was the way she said it that was the problem.
There's a kind of a judgment in that.
And it was fairly brutal. But we laughed about it later, thank goodness. But we were guided to a local GP who was quite wonderful, whose husband was an oncologist, and she and her husband had both dealt with a lot of end-of-life cases and said there has to be a better way to help people. So they had both trained, because you have to be trained not just as a doctor but for VAD.
Yeah.
So she was absolutely amazing. Couldn't speak more highly of her.
Amazing. So can you tell us a little bit about the approval process and what that was like for you both?
Yes. Well, once Ray had decided he wanted to apply for VAD and we had been in touch with the navigators, we had to have an opinion from 2 neurologists.
And that's here in Victoria, in Australia?
That's here in Victoria.
Because it's different state to state. Yeah.
I believe so. So we went to Ray's neurologist and she wrote a report in which she stated that in her belief, Ray had up to 12 months to live. And in Victoria, my understanding is that you need to be within 12 months of death.
That's right, for neurological disorders, I believe. 6
Ray's,
months for others.
For a neurodegenerative disorder like MND, it's 12 months. She made that statement for us. Once the navigators had that, we needed to go and find somebody totally separate who was also a neurologist who would confirm that opinion. He interviewed Ray and looked at the test results and he made an assessment that yes, he would concur. That meant Ray was eligible. Then we needed appointments with staff from VAD who came out to make sure that he wasn't under duress, that he understood the implications, he was in sound mind, so that they're very thorough in that way. We then had another appointment where 2 people came out and they showed us what the kit would look like, and they went through a rehearsal of how it would all be mixed up. And again, are you sure you want to do this? And they reassured themselves. And then we had the appointment with Mandy, who was going to be our supervising GP, and she came and talked to us as well. So the process is there's quite a bit of form filling, and there's quite a bit to do. There's quite a few hurdles, but for us, with it being MND, it was relatively straightforward. You came that hurdle, then this is the next one, this is the next, this is the next. So there was a sequence of events.
So you had a bad reaction initially from one GP. What about other people you told, friends and family, or, your community?
I think there was a range of opinions. The one we were worried about was my church. Were they going to be judgmental? Were they going to say, you can't do this, it's a terrible thing? They were completely supportive. They were
that's wonderful.
Absolutely marvellous.
Yes.
It took away the sense that we would be judged by people who really mattered to us.
Has Ray's death affected how you feel about your faith or God in any way?
No, actually, I think I was very conscious of the strength I was drawing from my faith, not just from my friends who just turned up on the doorstep with meals and sent me encouraging messages. I felt that I drew very close to God. I felt that God was very present with me. And my understanding is that God in no way says, I'm going to prevent you from having suffering like everybody else. He says, I will be with you in the suffering. And I very much felt God was present with me in that terrible time and was giving me strength and encouragement and reassurance. I kept finding verses that were beautiful about being sustained and rescued and upheld and loved. And that gave me a calm that I perhaps might not otherwise have felt. And I've certainly felt that afterwards. And I feel Ray's still there somewhere, and there may be I'll be reunited at some point. So when it's my turn to go, hopefully I'll see him again. And the very last thing I did say to him was, as he was about to take it, was, the next time you open your eyes, I'll be there beside you. And I think that's a lovely thought for me. And perhaps that comes from my faith. But certainly I found, funnily enough, even though we went through the process of VAD, I didn't feel it was an unforgivable sin.
And when you say even though, because
the
Christian,
you shan't murder.
Yes, no.
And Ray made a partnership to murder himself in a sense.
Yeah.
I don't think that would separate him from the love of God. And I didn't feel that I needed to say to him, this is going to separate you from me and from God forever. I just felt that if God is love and is compassion, he's going to feel far more love and compassion for Ray in that situation than he would for somebody who dies peacefully in their sleep. I've really felt God was, if anything, closer to us because of that. So he's there when it gets bloody and gutty and painful and difficult and awful, is when I feel he's closer. It was wonderful. That took away any sense that we were going to be criticised or judged. there were some people who were a little concerned about it, but on the whole, their love of Ray overcame any sense of wanting to make him change his mind. And Ray really needed to be in control of his situation. We had seen both my parents and both Ray's disappear into the medical system, where they were very well cared for. We've got no qualms about that. But the doctors were making all the decisions in the end. You can't go home. 3 of them died in hospital, 1 died in care. And Ray said, I want to be in charge of the decisions made about me. I want to make the decision about where I'll die and what medical procedures I'll undergo. And VAD was an important part of that. So he felt in a situation where he was becoming increasingly powerless, increasingly enfeebled and immobile, he felt that he had some control about the thing that mattered most. And that was where and when he died.
Yeah. So that aspect, does that give you some comfort?
Yes.
Yes.
And I didn't want to, I did want to persuade him to change his mind, but I couldn't. I really wanted to stand well back. And so my approach was to say, whatever you decide, I will support you and I'll do everything in my power to do that. The only time was when I gave him the medication and I handed it to him, and like everybody else had, I said, even now you can change. And he said, no. He said, this is going to be a huge relief for me, and I hope it is for you too. So that was the only time I tried to even slightly change his mind.
When he said to you that he hoped that it was a relief for you too, how does that feel to you then and now?
Well, later it worried me because I thought maybe he's doing this because he knows how exhausted I was. But he also knew that I would have cared for him right through to the end.
Yeah.
But it was becoming increasingly agonizing because by then he'd had a really nasty fall. And he had refused to go into hospital because he felt that the doctors would say, you can't go home in this condition. So he refused to go and told the ambos, who were gorgeous, that he had VAD and he'd be taking it soon. And they said 3 times, they said, look, we're sorry to keep asking you this, but we need to make absolutely certain you don't want to come to hospital with us because that's our responsibility.
Yeah.
And 3 times he said, no, I'm going to take the VAD. And they said, we respect that decision. And they helped me get him into bed and settled down. But he had done something horrible to himself and was in a lot of pain from then on.
In an accident at home, wasn't it?
Yes, his legs, he was going to the computer and he had his walker with him. And as he transferred from his walker to the chair, his legs just gave way underneath him and he fell backwards heavily, narrowly missed hitting a cupboard handle with his head and wedged himself between pieces of furniture and couldn't get up. And he was able to call me. I was only 3 blocks away, but I couldn't lift him on this occasion and needed to call the ambos. And I don't know, maybe they examined him and said they couldn't find anything broken, but tests at hospital would show if he'd done anything. I think he might have got some soft tissue injury because he got a big swelling on his back.
There was something that you and Ray talked to me about because we were the funeral business that was going to take care of things, so we kind of needed to be informed. And I think there was a word, or, you just talked about that awful countdown down to that day. And I had never thought of it like that. And can you tell me a little bit about what that felt like for you both?
Well, he decided at the end of January that he wanted to take the medication because he was in a lot of pain and he'd really had enough. But it's one thing to help your loved one in extremis like that. It's another when they say, next week I'm going to die. Then that was when really the emotional pressure came on. And of course, I'd say this is his last Saturday, this is his last Sunday, and trying to make it as good as I could. But on a countdown like that, I still prefer it to the thought of friends of mine have had their partners killed in a car accident or have had a heart attack, and they haven't had the chance to say goodbye. We had plenty of really lovely conversations. There was no unfinished business. And I did say to him early on, I'll make sure you can die at home. There's one thing I ask, can you write me a letter that tells me what our marriage has meant to you so that, in time to come, I can read it? And he did. And it was really lovely. He wasn't ever a person to say, I love you. He was not romantic or sentimental. And I don't think he even said it on our wedding day. But the day he decided on a date, every night he'd say it. And that's when I knew he wasn't going to change his mind. He was just gorgeous.
Did you get that letter after he died or before?
He had cut and pasted it. I haven't transcribed it yet. And he kept doing what he could because it was getting increasingly difficult. He put it on a file on his computer and said, I'm going to send this file across to you. Read it when I've gone. So I did.
And what was the standout sort of, what's the thing you remember most?
It was happy memories. He was listing happy memories and he was saying nobody could have done more and he's so grateful. It was really lovely. And I know he was very worried about me because his two closest mates, Jim and Chris, were so solicitous. After he'd gone, they would ring up. Do you need anything? How you got? Let's meet up for a coffee. And obviously he'd said to them, can you look after Sue when I'm gone? And bless them, they have. And their wives, them and their wives, they've just been really lovely. And I so appreciate that. So he made it clear. He said right at the end of this letter, he said he realised that I would be sad, but he hoped it wouldn't be for too long and that I would go on to have many more adventures and live a full and joyful life. Mm. And so I've just come back from my first holiday in 8 years.
Good.
I thought, yep, Ray would approve. I did.
Good. Good.
I went to Singapore, Malaysia and Hong Kong and had a wonderful time. And I did think then this is, one of those occasions that he wanted to think of me doing when he'd gone.
Can you tell me about the day that when it happened and what was some of the most difficult parts of that in the lead up?
I think I have absolutely no family here in Australia. And one of the things you really need is somebody with you on that day. And the GP, her name was Mandy, was going to be there. And I was wondering how the day would unfold. But as soon as I announced to my best mate, my oldest friend who lives in Hong Kong, as soon as I told her Ray's chosen February the 9th for the death, she rang me up and said, I'm booking my ticket. Do you want me to come before or after? She didn't say, would you like me to come? Because I would have said no. Mm. She just announced she was coming. So I said, would you come before so that you can be with me on that day? Which is asking a lot. It's traumatic for everybody, not just the principal carer. So she was there and Mandy arrived and we got the kit out.
Because you have to do that yourself, don't you?
Yes.
You have to mix up the medication.
Well,
or they ask you to,
it can be administered by the doctor or you can take it yourself. But most of the doctors, understandably, would prefer that you do it yourself. And so we got the kit out, I had to give Ray an anti-anxiety medication beforehand to just settle him, although he was perfectly settled. He was quite extraordinary. He always was a very calm and steadfast person, but there was no sign that today was going to be much different to any other. He was quite extraordinary.
What about you on that morning, though?
I was so focused on making sure everything was all right for him that I didn't go to pieces till later in the day. So I got him up, got him dressed and all the rest of it. He decided what he was going to wear, and we got him settled in his chair. And I didn't know what happens immediately after death, so just in case, I put plastic sheeting underneath a nice cosy blanket so that it, just in case. Wasn't necessary. And we then waited for Mandy, who arrived on the dot, and we had the kit. And when it's going to be self-administered, it is a drug. It's not an injection. It's something you drink. And we were warned it's extremely bitter, tastes horrible. So to prepare a drink to take the taste away afterwards. And so I did that. Ray originally wanted a brandy and dry, his best cognac, but apparently bubbles are not good. We settled for a fruit juice loaded up with sugar to make it really sweet. And when we'd got that right, he said he was ready. And
so you were there and your friend was there as well?
I was there and Jane was with me, and there was Mandy. And I said to her, would you mind mixing it up? I can't mix up the drink that's going to kill him. I can hand it to him, but that's it. And she was great. There's a kind of cloudy suspension liquid, and the drug goes into that, and you have to really mix it and shake it in the bottle. It's transferred into a little cup. It's really very simple and not at all threatening kind of situation. And at that point, Mandy and Jane left the room and we were together. And I knelt down beside him and gave him the cup and said, you can still change it. No. And he said his line about this is going to be a relief for me. And I knew it was going to be a relief for him. And I whispered a blessing to him and told him again how much I loved him. And he then looked at me and drank it and put it down. And we looked at one another. And after a minute or two, he said, I think it's starting to work. I'm feeling a bit sleepy. So I went forward and hugged him. And he started patting, you know how you do a child, you comfort a child. And his hand went up once, up twice, went down, and then his head just very gently came down onto my shoulder. And I gently eased him back into the chair, and he looked so peaceful. And I looked at him for a minute or two and then went out to get Mandy and Jane and wailed. I do hope, they do say the last thing to go is hearing. I do hope Ray didn't hear me wail. And they came back in and Mandy looked at him and she took his pulse and she said he's slipping into unconsciousness, but she said his pulse is still going. And we sat there for about half an hour measuring his pulse and watching. And at one point, we were looking at his watch to see what his heartbeat was, but that wasn't reliable. And at one time, I thought he'd gone, but Mandy said, just look in his neck, you could see a slight flutter. And she said, he's got a really strong heart. And she had a number of appointments, visits to do, and she said, look, I'll leave you for a while. I'll come back in about an hour. If If you need me, you ring me straight away, I'll come. And she came back in an hour and a half, but he'd gone. So it was very gradual, very gentle. And she did all the tests and said, you can ring Kate at Tomorrow Funerals. Let them know he's gone. And they reassured me that you guys would also test to make absolutely sure. And I had to leave the room then, and Jane met your girls, and she said they were wonderful. They were, again, very calm, very professional, gentle, careful. So, and I couldn't bear to see him leave the house. So Jane did that for me, and I'm so grateful. Your girls were lovely. Mm-hmm. So it actually is very peaceful, very quiet and gentle. Yeah. Wow. And I'm actually glad we did that process.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the end.
So no regrets? I mean...
No regrets. In fact, the further away I get from it, the more grateful I am.
That's interesting.
Because at the time, I just wanted him to stay. I didn't want to let him go. But the more I'm further away from it, I realise he really was going through a terrible, terrible time. And I wouldn't have wanted to extend that suffering. So...
How have you coped with the grief in the aftermath? And do you think that there's a difference, or what difference would there be because he chose to die at his own will as opposed to any other way?
I think I started grieving the minute he got the diagnosis. So I'd already done 2 years of grieving, and I thought I would be a basket case, and I thought I'm not going to want to get out of bed in the morning. But oddly enough, I've managed much better than I thought I would. And I think part of it is because I knew what was going to happen and was grieving in advance. So I'd done a fair bit of that. And the friends and my church friends all rallied around me and were so supportive and lovely.
Yeah.
And my sister came out from England and helped me with things as well.
I think that's a wonderful thing that you say, that you were able to cope a little bit better than you thought.
Yeah.
And to be open about that and have,
Yes.
I find that some people wouldn't be able to say that just because they might feel guilt or there's a certain way you should be. But I love that you feel very liberated to express exactly how you do feel. And if, of course, it was a terrible thing, I mean, we can see that just by your reaction and at this length afterwards, it's still so emotional. But I love that you found some sort of coping mechanism and are happy to talk about that and be open about that.
I'm very happy to talk about it because I felt that I didn't know anybody else who had taken a partner through VAD. And so there was a measure of apprehension about what it would be like. And so I'm very happy to share my experience. I suppose everybody's going to have a different experience, but mine was generally positive because we were well supported and well cared for. And the process enabled both of us to prepare for it. Ray wanted to make sure I was going to be all right afterwards. So, we did the will and we decided what he wanted to happen to all his tools, his cars, all the things.
He was very organised. I mean, I got that sense when I met him.
Very well organised.
And that's helpful as well.
Yes,
because that's
the finances, pensions, all of that, we were able to go through the whole lot together. And his concern was not just him and coping with MND. His concern was for me and how well I managed afterwards. And that's where I felt I was so blessed to have such a fabulous man for a husband.
Absolutely. And what stands out for me in that is that you said earlier that he wasn't one to tell you that he loved you every day, or even on the wedding day he didn't say that, but gee, he showed it.
Oh, he showed it every day. His actions were so much more eloquent than his words would have been, because words are easy, but following them up with actions, and he showed that all the way through.
Is there anything that you feel that you'd like to share with people who are just looking at this initially? Are there sort of some big things that think people need to think about in their lead up?
I think I would encourage people to consider it, to consider how they would respond emotionally, to consider the feelings of other important members of the family. Ray has a sister who was fully supportive of what he was about to do, understood. But otherwise, we didn't really have anyone to please but ourselves. We don't have children, and I think it would be important to consider how it affects everyone. But ultimately, it is for the patient to make that choice for themselves. And if you make that choice, you are not committing yourself to taking it. So the kit can stay in the house, and you have to nominate someone who can dispose of those unused medications responsibly. And we had a friend who would take it to the Alfred back for us. So that was all good. That was very reassuring for Ray. If things get really too bad, I can call it a day very quickly. We also had to bear in mind our neurologist was great. She said, if you are suffering with one symptom and it's really uncomfortable and painful, whatever, please let me know, because some people with VAD possibly take it earlier than need be, because they feel this isn't manageable. But she said, come and see us, because very often, if it's one or two isolated symptoms, we can work on that and give you an extended life. So I would encourage people to apply for it, consider it, and then to keep really close touch with the lead doctor who's caring for the patient to ensure that everything's being done possible to make them as comfortable as possible. And to know that there are all sorts of services afterwards to help you if you need it. Not least, you have contacted me several times, Kate, saying, how are you? Contacting me at Christmas. This is a hard time. That was way more care than I ever expected. And I was so touched by that, and I'm very grateful. So there is care, and there is a positive life as you work through the grief. One of the things Ray and I did every day was, at the end of the day, 5:30, we said, we're not going to talk about MND or VAD or anything else. Now it's beer o'clock. We're going to sit and enjoy the rest of the day together. And we would always end the day saying, what blessings were there in the day? And there always were blessings, things to be grateful for. And even through the grief journey, I still do that. And I say, what was a blessing today? And actually coming here today is a blessing, because if I can help someone else, that is something else to be grateful for, and has made my day worthwhile and joyful. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Wow. Thank you. What a privilege it is to have you here and to hear that and to, talk with you. It always is, Sue. It's been lovely, getting to know you a little bit more over the last year, and, you're a delight.
Oh, Kate.
Yeah.
I
should give you a hug.
Thank you, despite all the tears.
It's very emotional, but you're lovely, and I wish you well.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.